The sun was strong that morning, and the smell of the dump was almost unbearable. Jack, with his face sweaty and clothes dirty with mud, rummaged through a pile of debris. His two sons, Tommy and Alex, helped as best they could, sorting cans and plastics for recycling. "Dad, look at this!" Tommy shouted, holding up an empty bottle. "Good job, Tommy. Put it in the bag over there. Every penny counts," Jack said, smiling at his son. As he continued searching, something different caught his attention. It was a large, brown leather suitcase, partially buried in the trash. He carefully pulled it out, noticing the luxurious details of the luggage. "What's inside, Dad?" asked Alex, his eyes shining with curiosity. Jack hesitated for a moment. He had learned that, at the dump, the unexpected could always bring trouble. But curiosity was strong too. He slowly unzipped the suitcase, feeling a flutter in his stomach. When he lifted the lid, his eyes widened. Inside were things he had only seen in expensive store windows: a gold watch, several $100 bills, designer clothes, and perfume bottles. Jack picked up one of the bottles, looked at the label, and put it back. "Wow, this is rich people stuff," Tommy exclaimed, still holding the plastic bottle. "Looks like someone threw away their own fortune," Jack murmured in disbelief. He looked at his sons, thinking about what this could mean for them. With that money, he could feed his family for months, maybe even break out of that cycle of poverty. But deep down, he knew it wasn't his. "Dad, can we keep it?" Alex asked, his voice filled with hope. Jack looked into his son's curious eyes and sighed, placing his hand on Alex's shoulder. "No, son, this belongs to someone, and we're going to return it. Doing the right thing is more important than having these things." Tommy and Alex were silent, processing their father's words. Jack closed the suitcase again, determined. "Let's find out who this belongs to. Maybe we can help someone today." He lifted the suitcase with effort and, with his sons by his side, began to leave the dump, unaware that this decision would change their lives forever. As he walked with a heavy suitcase in one hand and a bag of recyclables in the other, Jack was overwhelmed with a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. His children followed him in silence, clearly confused by their father's decision. They knew how much they were struggling. Jack paused for a moment, set the suitcase down, and crouched to be at eye level with the boys. "Dad, why don't we just keep this money?" Tommy asked, frowning. "We could buy food and new clothes." Jack took a deep breath and looked at the small pile of bills inside the suitcase. "I know, son. This would solve a lot of our problems. But if we keep this, we'd be taking something that doesn't belong to us. And what happens when we do something wrong?" Alex quietly responded. "We get into trouble." Jack nodded. "Exactly. And even if no one finds out, that trouble stays inside of us. I want you to grow up knowing that what's right is more important than what's easy." The boys exchanged glances. It wasn't easy for children to understand this kind of thing, especially when they were hungry. Jack knew that and felt his heart tighten. He thought about the nights he watered down milk to make it last longer, the days he sent the kids to school with nothing but dry bread. He looked at the suitcase again. So many valuable things inside. But at the same time, each item seemed to weigh a ton. Jack stood up, determined. "Here's what we're going to do. We'll look for the owner of this suitcase. Maybe he'll reward us in some other way. And even if he doesn't, at least we'll know we did the right thing. That's worth more than any money." Tommy and Alex nodded, albeit a bit reluctantly. They trusted their dad, even if they didn't fully understand everything he was saying. "Let's return this suitcase then," said Alex, trying to sound enthusiastic. Jack smiled, picked up the suitcase again, and continued walking with his children by his side. He knew he was making the right decision, but he had no idea how much that act of honesty would transform their lives. They walked through the city streets, and Jack wondered where to start looking for the suitcase's owner. Deep down, he hoped that this choice, which seemed so difficult at the moment, would bring something good for his family. After walking for a while with his children by his side, Jack spotted a police officer on the corner, making his rounds. His instincts told him that asking for help from the police would be the right thing to do. With the heavy suitcase in one hand, he gathered his courage and approached, the boys following closely. "Officer, can I talk to you?" Jack called out, raising his free hand. The officer, a bulky man with a stern face, turned to him, his expression immediately suspicious. "What do you want?" he asked, looking Jack up and down. The contrast between the officer's spotless uniform and Jack's tattered clothes was obvious. "I found this suitcase at the dump. It's full of expensive things and documents, like a passport. I think it belongs to someone who lost it, and I'd like to return it," Jack explained, trying to keep his voice steady. The officer raised an eyebrow and took a step forward, examining the suitcase and then looking back at Jack. "What do you mean, found it at the dump?" he asked, his tone bordering on sarcasm. "You think I'm going to believe that story?" Jack felt his heart race. He hadn't expected this reaction. He tried to explain. "I know it sounds strange, but I just want to return it to the owner. I didn't take anything. Everything is still inside, intact." The officer took the suitcase from Jack's hands and opened it, flipping through the documents quickly. Then he looked at Jack with disdain. "And how do I know you didn't steal this? Do you have any idea how much money is in here? And these documents? If I check, am I not going to find out you're lying?" Jack swallowed hard. He knew things weren't looking good for him, but he insisted. "I didn't steal anything. You can check. I just want to do the right thing." The officer pulled out his handcuffs. "The right thing? The right thing would have been for you to call the police immediately. Now you're in possession of stolen goods, and that's a crime. Come on, hands behind your back." Despair overtook Jack. He looked at his children, who were watching the scene, scared. "Dad, is he going to arrest you?" Tommy asked, tears welling up in his eyes. Before Jack could answer, a woman came running, out of breath, pointing to the end of the street. "Officer, please help! A man stole my purse and ran that way. He took everything." The officer, surprised, looked back at Jack, as if unsure what to do for a moment. He then put the handcuffs back on his belt. "Stay here," he ordered the scavenger before running after the thief. Jack knew this was his chance. He looked at his children, grabbed the suitcase back, and began to walk away, his heart racing. "Let's go, boys," he said, pulling them by the hand. "Dad, why are we running? Didn't you say you wanted to return the suitcase?" Alex asked, confused. "I still do, son, but we need to find another way. That officer won't help us." The three of them disappeared down the narrow streets, Jack looking back at every corner, hoping the officer wasn't following them. He knew that now he had to be even more careful. Finding the suitcase's owner had become an even more difficult mission, but he wouldn't give up. And so, with the weight of the suitcase in his hands and the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, Jack continued his search, determined to do the right thing, even when the world seemed to be conspiring against him. Jack and his kids kept running through the narrow, dirty streets of the outskirts, trying to get as far away as possible from the cop who almost caught them. At every corner, Jack looked back, making sure they weren't being followed. His heart was racing, and he felt the sweat dripping down his forehead. "Dad, what's going to happen if the cop finds us?" Alex asked, holding tightly to his father's hand. Jack stopped for a moment, taking a deep breath, trying to calm both his kids and himself. "Don't worry, he won't find us. We just need to find another way to return the bag." Tommy, the older and more observant one, looked at his dad with eyes full of questions. "But why didn't he believe you? We just wanted to help." Jack looked at his son, feeling his heart ache. How could he explain the world's injustices to a child? "Sometimes people judge others by their appearance, son, but that can't stop us from doing the right thing." They stopped in a dark alley, far from the busy streets. Jack placed the bag on the ground and crouched down to be at eye level with the boys. "Listen, I'm going to return this bag to the owner no matter what, but we need to do it without the police seeing us, okay?" The boys nodded, still confused but trusting their father. "Dad, I'm scared," Alex said quietly. Jack put his hand on his son's shoulder and pulled him into a hug. "So am I, son, but everything will be okay. We'll make it." After a few minutes to catch their breath and think of a plan, Jack decided to take a different route. He knew he couldn't rely on the police anymore, so he started asking the locals if they knew the owner of the bag, using the documents he found as a reference. "Do you know anyone named Mr. Davidson?" he asked a lady sweeping the sidewalk. "Davidson? I don't know anyone by that name," she replied, shaking her head. And so, door to door, Jack continued his search. Some people looked at him with suspicion, others ignored him, but no one seemed to know the name. The boys were showing signs of exhaustion when finally a man standing in front of a store waved them over. "Did you say Davidson? He works downtown, in a big building on the main street. Everyone knows who he is. He's an important businessman." Jack felt a mix of relief and anxiety. "Can you give me the exact address?" "Sure. 5th Street and Main Street, you can't miss it. You'll see his name at the entrance." Jack thanked him with a smile, picked up the bag, and with his kids by his side, started walking in the direction the man had indicated. The exhaustion seemed lighter now that there was a light at the end of the tunnel. "We're almost there, boys. We're going to find the owner and sort this out once and for all." As they walked toward the city center, Jack knew this was his chance to prove to everyone, and especially to himself, that he had made the right decision. Deep down, he hoped that somehow this would bring something good to his family. Jack and the boys arrived downtown, a place completely different from the streets they knew. Tall skyscrapers, luxury cars driving by, and people in suits walking hurriedly. The boys, fascinated and a little intimidated, looked around while Jack kept his focus on finding the building he was looking for. "Dad, this place is so different," whispered Alex, holding tightly onto Jack's hand. "I know, son, but we'll be okay." "We're almost there," Jack replied, squeezing the boy's fingers to give him confidence. After a few minutes, they spotted the building with the name Davidson Enterprises, engraved in golden letters at the entrance. Jack took a deep breath and walked in, the boys following close behind. The lobby was grand, with marble floors and a modern reception area. They immediately drew curious glances. Jack, with his worn-out and dirty clothes, clearly stood out in the pristine environment. He approached the reception desk, feeling all eyes on him. "Excuse me? I'd like to speak with Mr. Davidson," Jack said, his voice steady despite the tension. The receptionist, a young and elegant woman, looked up from her computer and assessed Jack with a skeptical expression. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, not hiding her disbelief. "No, but it's very important. I found something that belongs to him, and I need to return it." She looked at the boys next to Jack, their dirty clothes and tired faces, then back at him. She seemed ready to dismiss them, but something in Jack's sincere gaze made her pause. "Wait here for a moment," she said, picking up the phone and calling upstairs. "There's someone here who says he has something for Mr. Davidson." "Yes, he has a suitcase." "Okay, I'll let him know." After hanging up, she looked back at Jack, still wary. "Mr. Davidson will come down to speak with you, but please don't do anything to cause trouble, okay?" Jack nodded, feeling his nerves tighten. A few minutes later, the elevator doors opened, and a tall man with gray hair and a serious expression stepped out. It was Mr. Davidson himself. He looked at Jack, then at the suitcase, and finally at the children beside him. "You said you have something of mine?" he asked, crossing his arms. "Yes, sir. I found your suitcase in the dump. I brought it back to return it." "Everything is inside, untouched," Jack replied, handing over the suitcase. Mr. Davidson took the suitcase carefully, opened it, and began examining the contents. His eyes narrowed as he looked through the documents, then relaxed as he confirmed that nothing was missing. He closed the suitcase and looked at Jack, still serious. "And why did you bring it back? You could have sold all of this and kept the money," he said, his voice a mix of curiosity and disbelief. Jack hesitated for a second, but then answered sincerely, "It wasn't mine to sell. I could use the money, of course. I have 2 kids to feed and we live a hard life. But I couldn't live knowing I took something that didn't belong to me. I just wanted to return it to you." Mr. Davidson was silent for a moment, observing Jack with an intensity that made him feel small. Then, he took a long breath, and his expression softened. "You have no idea how much this means to me. It's not just the valuable items. Inside here," he hesitated, pulling out a small silver urn hidden beneath the clothes. "These are my mother's ashes. I was going to take them to Hawaii, where she always wanted to rest. You saved something I could never replace." Jack felt a lump form in his throat. He hadn't known there was something so important in the suitcase. I'm so sorry for your loss. I'm glad you found this." Mr. Davidson looked at the boys beside Jack, then back at him, and for the first time, smiled slightly. You're an honest man, Jack. That's rare. You and your kids have been through a lot, I imagine. Let's talk. I'm sure I can do something to help you. Jack looked at his children and then at the man in front of him. Perhaps, finally, life was about to change for the better. Mr. Davidson invited Jack and his children to come up to his office on the top floor of the building. While they waited for the elevator, Jack felt his hands sweaty and his mind full of doubts. He had never imagined being in a place like this, especially for doing something that seemed so simple, returning something that wasn't his. When the elevator doors opened, they were led into a spacious room with floor-to-ceiling glass windows offering a panoramic view of the city. The office was modern and luxurious, with elegant furniture and an imposing desk in the center. Jack looked around, impressed by the stark contrast between this environment and the landfill where he spent his days. Mr. Davidson sat behind the desk and gestured for Jack and the boys to take the seats in front of him. "Please, make yourselves comfortable," he said, smiling. "I imagine this is the first time you've been to a place like this." Tommy, wide-eyed, nodded, unable to hide his amazement. "I've never seen anything so big and shiny, sir," he said, looking around. Mr. Davidson chuckled softly. "Well, I hope this is just the beginning of some good changes for you." He leaned forward, folding his hands on the desk. "Jack, you told me downstairs that you could have used the money from the suitcase to help your family. That makes me wonder how you ended up in this situation. If you don't mind, I'd like to know more about you." Jack took a deep breath. It wasn't easy to talk about his life, but something in Mr. Davidson's eyes encouraged him to be honest. "I used to work in construction. I always managed to keep a job until the company I was with shut down. After that, it was tough finding another opportunity. My wife," he hesitated, his voice faltering a bit. "She passed away 2 years ago, and since then, I've been trying to take care of the boys on my own. The job at the landfill doesn't pay much, but at least I can put food on the table." Mr. Davidson listened in silence, his face showing compassion. "I'm very sorry for your loss, Jack. I can't imagine how difficult it must have been for you," he said sincerely. Alex, who had been quiet until then, looked at the millionaire and, with his small voice, added, "Dad always tells us that we'll get through this, that things will get better one day. We believe him." Mr. Davidson smiled at the boy. "And he's absolutely right. You have an amazing father, and not everyone would have done what he did today." Jack felt his eyes fill with tears, but he quickly wiped them away with the back of his hand. He never expected to hear such words from someone like Mr. Davidson. "I just did what I thought was right, sir. I couldn't take something that wasn't mine, even though we're going through tough times." Mr. Davidson stood up and walked over to a small side table, where he picked up an envelope and returned, handing it to Jack. "Here, Jack, this is a small reward for your honesty," he said. Jack opened the envelope carefully, revealing a considerable amount of money. His eyes widened, but he quickly looked at Mr. Davidson, shaking his head. "Sir, I can't accept this. I didn't do it for money. I just wanted to return what was yours." Mr. Davidson smiled again, this time with a look that mixed respect and admiration. "And that's exactly why you deserve this reward, Jack. But that's not all." He paused, observing the surprised expression on Jack's face. "I want you to work for me. We need people like you, who understand the value of honesty and integrity." Jack was speechless for a moment. He looked at his children, who were now gazing at him with anticipation. I don't even know what to say, sir," he murmured, still processing the offer. "Say yes," Mr. Davidson replied, smiling. "I'm sure that, with a bit of training, you'll be an excellent employee, and I want your kids to have the chance to study, to grow up in a safe environment. Let's change your lives, Jack. I insist." Jack finally let a shy smile escape. Maybe this was, indeed, the beginning of a different future, a future he had always dreamed of for his children. "Then yes, I accept," he said, emotional. "Thank you, Mr. Davidson. Thank you so much." Mr. Davidson stood up and extended his hand. "Welcome to our family, Jack." As he shook the millionaire's hand, Jack felt like he was starting a new chapter in his life, a chapter he never imagined would be possible. After accepting the job and the new opportunities Mr. Davidson had offered, Jack and his sons were invited to stay at a hotel in the city for a few days, while the paperwork and preparations for the new job were organized. For someone who had spent years living with the bare minimum, that kind of comfort felt surreal. The next morning, Mr. Davidson invited them to breakfast at a fancy restaurant overlooking the lake. Jack and the boys, still adjusting to this new reality, tried not to feel out of place. The table was filled with fresh fruits, breads, and dishes they had never seen before. "Dad, can I have this?" Tommy asked, pointing to a bowl with what looked like porridge. "Of course, son. Take whatever you want," Jack replied, smiling. "Today, we can." Mr. Davidson watched the family's interaction with a genuine smile. He waited until everyone was served and comfortable before speaking. "Jack, there's something I haven't told you yet about the contents of the suitcase," he said, his voice calm but with a serious tone. Jack stopped eating and looked at the businessman, his eyes filled with curiosity and apprehension. "What is it, sir?" "I thought I returned everything." Mr. Davidson took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "When my mother passed away, she left me a few personal items that were very important to her. Among those items were some family jewelry and, most importantly, the small urn with her ashes. She always told me she wanted her ashes scattered at sea in Hawaii because that's where she felt the happiest. I was going to do that when I had a big fight with my wife. In a moment of anger, she threw my suitcase away without knowing what was inside." He paused, looking at the lake as if reliving that painful moment. "When I realized the suitcase was gone, I was devastated. Not because of the material things, but because of her ashes. I felt like I had failed my mother, like I wasn't able to fulfill her last wish." Jack felt a lump in his throat. Now he understood the true value of what he had found. I didn't know, sir," he said, his voice trembling. "I just wanted to return everything because I knew it wasn't mine. I never imagined something so precious was in there." Mr. Davidson nodded, his eyes glistening with emotion. "And that's why I brought you here today. I wanted to thank you again. You didn't just return material possessions. You gave me back the chance to fulfill the last promise I made to the most important person in my life." He then turned to the boys. "And that's why I want you to come with me to Hawaii. I want you to be there when I finally fulfill my mother's wish. You are living proof that there is still goodness and honesty in this world, and I would like you to share this moment with me." Tommy and Alex looked at their father, their eyes wide with surprise. "Are we going to Hawaii, Dad?" Alex asked, his voice full of excitement and disbelief. Jack looked at Mr. Davidson, then at his sons. He had never dreamed of seeing a place like Hawaii, let alone taking his children somewhere so far away. "Sir, I don't know how to thank you. I could never afford a trip like that." Mr. Davidson chuckled softly. "Jack, this is a gift. I don't want anything in return, just your company and the boys. After everything you've done for me, it's the least I can do." Jack felt the tears welling up, but he blinked quickly to hold them back. He looked at his sons, who were now smiling from ear to ear, and nodded, his voice choked with emotion. "So, we're going to Hawaii," he said, still in disbelief. Mr. Davidson smiled, raising his coffee cup. "To Hawaii, and to a new beginning for all of us." Jack raised his cup, feeling as if he were dreaming. At that moment, he realized that the decision to return the suitcase had not only changed his family's fate, but also the life of a man who, despite all his wealth, had been in desperate need of a gesture of kindness and hope. And so, a simple garbage collector and his sons were about to embark on a journey that would forever change their lives and forge an unbreakable bond of gratitude and friendship with a man who, for a brief moment, had lost faith in humanity. The trip to Hawaii felt like a dream. Jack had never left his hometown, let alone traveled by plane. For him and his children, everything was a completely new and magical experience. From the moment they boarded Mr. Davidson's private jet, the boys were in awe of every detail. The comfortable seats, the meals served on board, and even the view of the clouds from the window. "Look, Dad, we're in the clouds," Tommy exclaimed, glued to the window, while Alex tried his best to see as well. Jack smiled, feeling a mix of excitement and relief. He never imagined he could provide something like this for his children. "I know, son. It's amazing, isn't it?" he replied, placing his hand on Tommy's head. Mr. Davidson, seated nearby, watched the scene with a calm smile. Seeing the genuine joy on that family's faces brought him a peace he hadn't felt in a long time. "Jack, I'm so happy you're here with me. This trip means a lot to me, and having you all by my side makes it even more special," he said in a gentle voice. Jack looked at Mr. Davidson, still trying to process everything that was happening. "Mr. Davidson, I don't even know how to thank you. I never thought something like this could happen to me and the boys." Mr. Davidson waved his hand, dismissing the formality. "Please call me John, and you don't need to thank me. In fact, I'm the one who should be grateful. You've brought a ray of hope and honesty into my life at a time when I needed it the most." Hours later, when they landed in Hawaii, they were welcomed with flower leis and a gentle breeze carrying the scent of the ocean. Jack and the boys looked out at the horizon, where the waves softly broke on the white sandy beach, as if they were living a dream. "Is this real, Dad?" Alex asked, his eyes shining with excitement. "Yes, my son, it's real, and we're going to enjoy every moment," Jack said, his heart filled with joy. The next day, Mr. Davidson took them to a quiet beach, far from the tourists, where he planned to fulfill the promise he made to his mother. The family gathered near the water as John held the small silver urn delicately. "Mom, I know it took me a long time to get here," he began, his voice choked with emotion. "But I brought some special people with me. People who, through their kindness, brought light to my path when I needed it most." He looked at Jack and the boys, then approached the water. With a gentle gesture, he opened the urn and allowed the ashes to be carried away by the wind, spreading into the turquoise sea. A respectful silence enveloped the scene, broken only by the sound of the gentle waves. Jack felt a deep emotion, as if he were witnessing something sacred. "Goodbye, Mrs. Davidson," he murmured, almost in a whisper, bowing his head in respect. After a few minutes of silence, John turned to Jack and his children, a serene smile on his face. "You have no idea how much this meant to me. You helped close a chapter, to fulfill a final wish. And now, I want this moment to be special for you too," he said in a caring tone. Tommy and Alex looked at their father, and Jack nodded, moved. "Thank you, John. We'll never forget this." The rest of the day was spent enjoying the beach. Jack watched his children play in the sand, laugh and run through the waves as if they were normal kids, without the worries that poverty had imposed on them for so long. He allowed himself to relax, feeling the warmth of the sun on his skin and the gentle breeze. "Dad, can we come back here someday?" Tommy asked, lying next to his father on the sand. Jack smiled and looked at the horizon. "Who knows, son? Maybe one day we'll come back, as tourists," he replied. Though he knew that moment, those memories, were enough for him. When the sun began to set, everyone gathered again. Mr. Davidson looked at the family and said, "Tomorrow we'll go back home. But from now on, your lives will be different. I want you to have all the opportunities you never had." He looked directly at Jack. "This is just the beginning." Jack nodded, his eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you, John. You've given us more than we could ever dream of. And it all started with a suitcase." Mr. Davidson chuckled softly. "Sometimes the most important things in life come from the most unexpected places. And I'm so glad that suitcase brought us together." And so, under the golden Hawaiian sky, a promise of a new beginning was sealed. Jack and his children knew that from then on, life would never be the same again. And for the first time in a long time, the future seemed bright and full of hope. Back in the United States, Jack's life and that of his children were already beginning to change significantly. Mr. Davidson had kept all the promises he had made. Upon arrival, Jack was surprised with a new home, spacious and comfortable in a quiet neighborhood, nothing like the tiny shack they used to live in. When they arrived at the place, the boys could hardly contain their excitement. "Dad, is this house ours?" Tommy asked, eyes wide, looking at the immaculate facade. "Yes, son," Jack said, still in disbelief. "It's ours." The boys ran inside, exploring every corner, laughing and shouting with joy. Jack, on the other hand, stood at the door for a moment, trying to process everything that had happened. His eyes filled with tears, but he quickly wiped them away. He didn't want his children to see him cry. Mr. Davidson appeared beside him, watching the scene with a calm smile. "I hope you like it. I believe this is the fresh start you deserve." Jack turned to him, his voice choked with emotion. "I don't even know where to begin to thank you. You've changed my family's life forever, John. I have no words." Mr. Davidson placed a hand on Jack's shoulder. "You've already thanked me by returning something invaluable to me. The honesty and kindness you've shown are rare qualities. All I'm doing is giving back." They entered the house together. The living room was spacious, with new and elegant furniture, something Jack had never dreamed of having. The boys were already in the kitchen, opening drawers and checking out the refrigerator filled with food. "Dad, there's so much food here. Can we eat whatever we want?" Alex asked, his eyes shining with joy. Jack smiled. "Yes, we can," he said, feeling his heart warm. Mr. Davidson then explained a few more things. "Jack, I've also arranged for new clothes and everything the boys will need for school. From now on, they'll have all the support necessary to study and grow. And as for you, tomorrow we'll start with your new job at my company. I want you to feel comfortable learning everything you need. I know you'll do great." Jack nodded, still in disbelief. "Thank you, John. I promise I won't let you down. I'll work hard." Mr. Davidson laughed softly. "I know you will. The only thing I ask is that you continue being the honest and genuine person you've always been." They spent the rest of the day exploring the house and adjusting to their new reality. Jack, seeing his children so happy and safe, finally allowed himself to relax. Sitting on the porch, he reflected on everything that had happened. That simple act of returning the suitcase not only changed his family's life, but also brought something invaluable to Mr. Davidson. It was as if, for a brief moment, the universe had conspired to bring together two lives that desperately needed a miracle. The next day, Jack showed up at Mr. Davidson's company. He felt a little out of place, wearing new clothes and carrying a folder with his documents. But the warm reception from everyone made him feel more at ease. Mr. Davidson introduced him to the rest of the team as the most honest man I've ever met, and everyone greeted him with applause and smiles. After a few weeks, Jack had already adapted to his new job. He dedicated himself fully, learning quickly and always willing to help. His effort did not go unnoticed. One afternoon, while Jack was organizing some papers, Mr. Davidson walked into the office and drew everyone's attention. "Everyone, I'd like to say a few words," he began, attracting curious looks. "Since Jack joined our team, he has been an example to all of us. His story of honesty and determination reminds us of what truly matters in life. So it is with great pleasure that I announce Jack's promotion to supervisor of our new recycling unit." The employees applauded, and Jack, caught by surprise, was speechless. He looked at Mr. Davidson, still in disbelief. "Sir, I don't know what to say." Mr. Davidson smiled and approached him. "Just say that you'll keep doing what you do best, being yourself." Jack nodded, emotional. "I promise I won't let you down. Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone." He knew this was just the beginning of a new phase. The honesty and kindness, which he always believed were the right path, were finally being rewarded in a way he had never imagined. And so, a simple garbage collector became an example of courage and integrity, proving that sometimes true wealth is not in what we have, but in who we are. Time went by, and Jack continued to excel more and more at Mr. Davidson's company. His commitment, humility, and honesty earned him the respect of everyone. He became a role model for his colleagues, always willing to help and eager to learn. Every challenge that came his way, he faced with the same determination that had led him to return that suitcase all those months ago. One day, after an important meeting, Mr. Davidson asked Jack for a private conversation in his office on the top floor of the company. "Jack, please come in," he said, pointing to the chair in front of his desk. Jack entered, feeling a slight anxiety. It wasn't every day that the company owner called him in for a private conversation. "Mr. Davidson, is something wrong?" he asked, trying to hide his nervousness. Mr. Davidson chuckled softly. "Not at all, Jack. In fact, I wanted to talk about the company's future and your future here." He leaned back in his chair, clasping his hands together. "Since you started working with us, I've seen how dedicated you are, and more than that, how you inspire those around you. That's something rare, you know?" Jack, unsure of what to say, just nodded. Well, what I want to say is that I'd like to offer you an even greater opportunity, Mr. Davidson continued. I'm planning to expand our recycling unit to other cities. I want you to be in charge of leading this expansion. It would be a big challenge, but I'm confident you're more than ready. Jack was speechless for a moment. He had gone from being a trash collector to a supervisor, and now Mr. Davidson was offering him a leadership position he had never dreamed of reaching. Mr. Davidson, I don't know what to say. It's an incredible opportunity, but do you really think I'm the right person for this? Mr. Davidson leaned forward, a confident smile on his face. Absolutely, Jack. You know this business better than anyone. And more than that, you have something that can't be taught: character. I want this company to grow with people like you in leadership. What do you say? Jack thought for a moment. He looked out the window, seeing the city stretch out as far as his eyes could see. He remembered the hard days at the dump, the struggles to feed his children, and now he was here, about to take another huge step in his life. I accept, Mr. Davidson, he finally said, his voice steady. I won't let you down. Mr. Davidson stood up and extended his hand, smiling. I know you won't, Jack. Welcome to the leadership team. They shook hands, and Jack felt a wave of emotions. He knew the road ahead would be tough, but he was ready to face every challenge that lay ahead. A few months later, Jack was heading the expansion project. He traveled frequently to other cities, negotiating contracts, meeting new partners, and expanding the company's recycling operations. Each success was a victory not just for the company, but for him and his family, who now lived a life that had once seemed impossible. One evening, after another successful trip, Jack returned home, exhausted but happy. When he entered the living room, he found Tommy and Alex sitting on the couch, grinning from ear to ear. Dad, look what we made, Alex exclaimed, handing Jack a piece of paper. It was a drawing of the three of them at the beach, with the caption, Our New Life. Jack looked at the drawing, feeling a warmth in his chest. That simple gesture from his kids meant the world to him. You two are the best artists I've ever met, he said, hugging them both. This is going up on my office wall. Tommy looked at his dad, curious. Dad, do you like your new job? Jack smiled and nodded. I like it a lot, son. But you know what I like even more? What? Alex asked, his eyes wide. Knowing that you two are happy, safe, and have everything you need. That's what's most important to me. The boys hugged him tightly, and Jack allowed himself to feel all the happiness of that moment. The journey to that point hadn't been easy, but every sacrifice, every difficult choice, had been worth it. He had achieved much more than money or success. He had gained the peace and dignity he had always dreamed of for his family. And deep down, he knew that all of this had been possible because one day he decided to do the right thing. And that choice, though simple and difficult at the same time, had changed everything. Now he looked to the future with optimism. He knew there would still be challenges, but he also knew that, with honesty and determination, he and his family could face anything. So, what do you guys think about ordering some pizza to celebrate? Jack asked, laughing, as the boys jumped with joy. Yes, with lots of cheese, they shouted in unison. And so, on that simple night, in a home filled with love and hope, Jack celebrated another victory, knowing that the future, however uncertain, was in his and his children's hands, and he would do everything to make it a bright one. Jack started working in his new role as the leader of expansion at the recycling unit, and his life, along with his children's, changed in ways he could never have imagined. His new position required constant travel and meetings with important people, something that once seemed so far from his reality. Every closed contract in every new city where Mr. Davidson's company established itself represented not just professional success, but the realization of a dream that once seemed impossible for the humble garbage collector he used to be. After a long and productive day, Jack finally returned home. The feeling of stepping into his new house and seeing his children happy and safe was still somewhat surreal to him. That day, as soon as he opened the door, he was greeted by the usual excitement of the boys. "Dad, you're home!" Tommy exclaimed, running to hug him. "Welcome back, Dad," said Alex, right behind, grabbing onto Jack's leg. Jack smiled and hugged them both tightly. "I missed you so much. How was your week?" "It was great. We did a project at school about recycling and won an award," Alex said proudly. "Really? That's wonderful news," said Jack, amazed. "What did you present?" Tommy, always enthusiastic, explained. "We made a model showing how recyclable waste can become new things. And everyone was impressed when we told them how you helped save the planet." Jack felt a wave of emotion. Seeing his children following in his footsteps and understanding the importance of his work was a reward no salary could buy. "You guys are amazing, you know that? I'm so proud of you," he said, hugging them once more. After dinner, while the boys played in the backyard with their sister Sally, Jack stayed on the porch, watching the scene. The new house was a symbol of everything he had achieved, a safe and comfortable place where his children could grow up without fear. It was something he never imagined would be possible, but was now a part of his reality. Sally joined him on the porch, bringing 2 cups of coffee. "You did it, Jack. Look at them. They're happy, safe. You made this happen," she said, handing him one of the cups. Jack took a sip of the coffee, feeling the warmth and comforting aroma. "Yes, but I had a lot of help along the way," he said thoughtfully. "Mr. Davidson changed our lives. I still feel like it's all a dream, and I could wake up at any moment." Sally nodded. "But you also changed his life, Jack. It wasn't just the bag you returned. It was hope, faith in people. He saw something in you that inspired him. And now, you're here, inspiring others." Jack smiled, looking at his children playing. "I never imagined life would take this turn. I remember the days when all I wanted was enough food to feed the boys. Now I can give them so much more than that." Sally placed her hand on her brother's shoulder, her eyes full of pride. "You deserve all of this, Jack, and I'm sure you'll achieve even more." The next day, Jack went to the office for another important meeting. As he entered the conference room, he was greeted with applause. Mr. Davidson was there, along with the entire team. "Jack, I'd like to share some great news with everyone." Mr. Davidson began with a warm smile. "Since you took on the role of expansion leader, our company has grown significantly. Your hard work, integrity, and dedication have been crucial to this success. So I'm pleased to announce that, starting today, you will be our new Director of Recycling Operations. Congratulations!" Shock and emotion overcame Jack. He stood up, trying to process what he had just heard. I don't know what to say," he murmured, his eyes shining with emotion. "This is more than I could have imagined. Thank you, John. Thank you all." Mr. Davidson approached, placing a hand on Jack's shoulder. "You deserve this, Jack. It's not just about what you do, but who you are. We're lucky to have someone like you on our team. And I know this is just the beginning of an even greater journey." Jack, overwhelmed, shook Mr. Davidson's hand firmly. Looking around, he saw the smiling faces of his colleagues, people who, like him, had found a purpose in work that made a difference. When he got home that night, Jack shared the news with the boys, who jumped with joy upon hearing about their father's promotion. "Dad, does this mean you're the boss of everyone now?" Tommy asked, his eyes wide. Jack laughed, shaking his head. "Not exactly, but it's a big responsibility. And you know what that means, right?" "What?" they asked in unison. "That we have to keep working hard, being honest, and doing what's right, no matter what. That's what got us here, and that's what will continue to guide us." Alex, always observant, looked at his father and asked, "Dad, do you like being the boss?" Jack thought for a moment and then replied, smiling, "I like knowing that I can help people, that I can make a difference, just like we did when we returned that bag. That's what matters most." After putting the boys to bed and telling the usual bedtime story, Jack went to the porch and looked at the sky. The stars shone brightly and he felt at peace. He knew that life would always bring challenges, but now he was ready to face them, knowing he was not alone. There, under the starry sky, Jack made a silent promise. He would continue to be the man he had always been, honest and hardworking, dedicated to his family and what he believed was right. Because in the end, that was the true wealth he had achieved, a wealth no amount of money could buy. With his heart full of gratitude and hope, Jack knew he was just beginning to write the story of a promising future for himself and his children. And as long as he had the strength, he would do everything to ensure that this future was bright and full of new achievements. And so, the man who was once a garbage collector, who chose honesty over ease, continued to walk his path, inspiring everyone around him and building, with every gesture and choice, a dignified and fulfilling life for his family. If you enjoyed this video and want to hear more stories like this one, we have prepared the next video just for you. Click here to watch.